Okay, welcome aboard there, internets. Glad you're back. Today we're going to look at Unit 1, Chapter 2, First Farmers. We looked at First Humans in the last video, and I posted the epilogue as well. Little note about the epilogue, that is just kind of looking at Strayer's idea and understanding about the big history of the world. I'm kind of a fan of looking at that. I think it's really interesting stuff. But there's not much of that that's going to be on the test for the first unit. First Humans, First Farmers, and the next video I'll do is called First Civilizations. So these three videos and these three segments of notes I think are really important for you to focus in on and learn for your test. And this is the basics to understand. Of course, reading your textbook, the target sheets that we have for you, and focusing in on every bit of what we've been working on in class with documents and those types of things is real important. So let's check it out. First Farmers, this is the agricultural evolution that happens independently across several regions of the world. If you remember, we talked about that. Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, they both develop agriculture independently. Obviously they do, because they're not communicating just yet. Columbus hasn't made his little trip. We'll trace the development of agriculture in its various locations here, and we'll consider the social implications of the agricultural revolution, which are pretty strong. So I'm just flashing this up here, some words to know and some things to think about. The Bantu Migration is massively important in world history, in my opinion. I mean, I didn't even know about this when I was in high school, because it really wasn't in our textbook. Nobody talked about it. But it's the Bantu-speaking peoples of Africa, and what's now southern Nigeria, Cameroon, to most of Africa. So they spread down in these different developmental periods, starting in 3000 BCE, and they continue to do this for several millennia. And that shows the world and us today about how highly civilized African societies were. They were trading, they had developed languages and systems of trade, and they were, in many cases, pastoral initially, and then they settled into cities. So when Europeans come to Africa and they experience Africa, they have this sense of them not being very civilized and not being very cultured, but they're not seeing the whole picture correctly. And we'll see that, and we'll talk about that this spring with social Darwinism. So pastoral societies and pastoral societies, we're definitely going to see that quite a lot, and it'll pop back up again here with civilizations, because you have a civilization, but around it, and almost sort of like symbiotic with it, is this a pastoral society, which will be able to do some trading and deal with that. We'll look at it with China and the folks who live just to the north of them, and then later on in chapter 12 of our textbook, when we study the Mongols, that'll be a big important part. And there are some different areas here, some different words to consider and think about. Where in the world are these places, why are they important, and why are these different things important? So if you want to pause those and jot those down, you can, or rewind back and pause it. But let's look at the Paleolithic Age first. This is the Old Stone Age. I kind of tell students that the good way to remember Paleolithic is think of an old stone. It's been left outside for a long time. So the sun's been beating down on it, and it has become very pale or white. If you leave a piece of lawn furniture outside during the summer here in Texas for certain, the sun's going to beat down on it. It's going to lose its dark color. It's going to become pale over time. So that might be a good way to remember the Paleolithic is your old stone, and it lasts until about 10,000 years ago, 3,000 years after the last ice age. So humans use very simple stone tools. That's where they get Paleolithic from, stone. They were nomads who moved place to place. We talked about Paleolithic time period quite a lot in the lead up to this. But foragers, hunters, and gatherers, and these are people that had a pretty healthy lifestyle, as Jared Diamond showed us in his article about the humanity's greatest mistake. We've learned a little bit about it with Guns, Germs, and Steel. But at the bottom it says, 2 Hadza men returned from the hunt. The Hadza are one of the few contemporary African societies that live primarily by foraging, and they're very similar to the San, which we've studied in the textbook, and in some cases that's the same group. I'm tired of hunting and gathering too, but nobody's invented the grocery stores yet. And so it's interesting, why do people end up settling down and no longer being Paleolithic or hunters and gatherers? There's some real good reasons for that, and we'll study those as we go here. But something to really remember and keep in mind is the old idea that a caveman or Paleolithic person would grab a woman by the hair and drag them around, and it was the man who was in charge and the woman would do what they said. That is just absolutely not true. There was much more equality between the genders of male and female in the Paleolithic era, because men and women both contributed very equally to providing food for the family, and they were doing that. That was a main source of any work. There weren't like systematically broken down hierarchy of different kinds of jobs. I mean, everybody sort of did the same thing, and because they were providing equally, they were seen as equals by each other. And they began building some simple shelters that lacked, like, the big permanent civilized ones, because they weren't going to stay in one location very long. If you would probably starve. The Neolithic Age is this next developed era, and there are some eras in between, but this is where the big transition happens. This is the new Stone Age. About 10,000 years ago, you're talking about the agricultural revolution. It is the deliberate cultivation of particular plants, as well as the taming and breeding of particular animals, this dramatic change from food gathering to food production. The systematic agriculture and domestication of animals gave humans the ability to acquire food on a regular basis, and it's going to support a much bigger population. So you see Skara Brae there in Scotland, evidence of home furnishings in Europe's most complete Neolithic village that they've been able to uncover. And there are lots of examples of these Neolithic cities, or little towns actually, like agricultural towns that started to develop. This is a dramatic change, and there's really no other way to say it other than I think that this is, and many people believe, it's the greatest and biggest and most impactful revolution in the history of the world. And I'm a fan of the French Revolution because it's so mind-blowing, and I guess your mind is blown when you see some people's minds be cut off from their body. But this is one that had such a tremendous impact on the world, physically and socially, culturally, that for a very long time period, human beings were Paleolithic and getting along just fine. Everything seemed to just work, and there was no big deal. So why would they settle down and start to farm? Now, think about it yourself. What are the reasons for that? We'll kind of come back to it in a few minutes here, but why would they stop doing what worked so well for so long? This is such a dramatic change. So they're no longer going to be nomadic. They're going to settle in one location and build up a population of people there. So the transition first happens in the Middle East, and you know why that is. It's the geographic luck that Jared Diamond talks about, where systematic agriculture and domestication of animals provides for that area in a way that no other place on earth has those kinds of advantages, especially with domesticated animals, because there just aren't any in all these other regions of the world, from New Guinea, where Jared Diamond was in Guns, Germs, and Steel, Australia, Africa, zero animals that could be domesticated. North America, zero. The only place in the Americas was that little spot there on the west coast of South America, what today is Peru, where you had the llama. And what's the llama like? It's not like you can pull a big, huge plow with a llama. They're not going to go for that. They're pretty small creatures, but they could be pack animals in some cases, and their fur could be used for clothing and those sorts of things. But in the Middle East, what we think of as the Middle East today, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, in that area, you had a number of large domesticated animals like cow and oxen, goat, sheep. Those are good examples of them, but these are massively important for being able to create a civilization. So the selection of these high yield grains by women is really key. Women have a big role in picking and choosing the seeds that they plant during the agricultural revolution, and what they're doing is kind of weeding out. In fact, they're weeding out the seeds that would not produce high yields, and they're choosing the ones that will. And over time, the ones that weren't good enough were left and no longer used. Agriculture is the second great human process after the settlement of the globe, which we learned about with First Peoples. There was an intensification of living, getting more food and resources from much, much less land. I mean, this creates large populations, and it means that there's a greater need to intensively exploit the land and the animals to provide for the people. So there's some big ideas for you. You can kind of pause these and look through them, but these are maybe things you should review before the test. What you see at the bottom there is this independent breakthrough to agriculture. We'll look at that in another slide here in a second. But hunting and gathering societies were egalitarian, equal, small, mobile, ritualistic. Early humans spread out across Africa. But after the last ice age, they settled around available sources of grains and water and formed large populations. And you see where those pinkish, purplish areas are on the map there at the bottom. Agriculture develops independently in many parts of the world, as those areas show you. And then you have these varied, complex, and very socially stratified, meaning there's a class system that develops. Agricultural revolution is large and expands civilizations in a larger way, and it creates complex, urban, organized, and very unequal social structures, and power becomes important. You need a powerful government, maybe, to organize to protect the civilization if it's under attack, or the city-state that's under attack. So you end up having a unified culture in those areas based on language, literature, laws, myths, or understanding of what the world is about and how it works, religion, and this thing called monumental art, which you'll see, buildings, those types of things. So here are your major river valley civilizations, and these vary from the top left. You'll see the Olmecs, or the Olmec, in the Gulf of Mexico right there. Across the top, of course, that's the Mesopotamians, here in purple across the top, the Babylonians, Sumer. And then over here, the Chinese civilization of the Shang dynasty. So you've got that happening along the Yellow River. We'll study the Chinese here in the 3rd chapter. The Indus Valley civilization is really pretty intense. I mean, they develop a strong civilization that is, today we don't have much evidence from it, but what we do see is the evidence that does remain is, wow, pretty amazing and great group of people that could do some incredible things. The lower Egyptian area here, or in all of Egypt, develops. And we've got this area which is in today Peru, which is called Norte Chico civilization, later becomes the Inca. So here's your independent breakthroughs to agriculture. You see the arrows spreading, and one of the really interesting things about this, I think, is that you're going to end up seeing these arrows where they're spreading independently developed ideas and breakthroughs in technology of agriculture. This in chapters 4, 5, and 6 is going to be your trading networks. Almost exactly, really. What is this line here, other than the Silk Road, the idea of a road, but it's a number of routes or roads. And so one of the interesting things Jared Diamond brings up is the fact that this lateral view across east to west, across Eurasia, is a similar growing season and climate where the same kinds of products and livestock and animals can survive. And so it becomes very civilized very quickly. In the Americas, it's a little bit different here because you've got a kind of a north and west run of things, and they develop more of what's called a web of trade. And I think of like a spider web that's kind of flimsy. I mean, you can see the patterns, but it can easily be broken, and they're not strong, and they're not traveled as quickly. And I think that's one of the reasons why the North American and South American civilizations don't explode in population like Eurasia and Europe does. So the time when Europeans make contact with the New World, there are great cities and civilizations, especially the Aztecs in Mesoamerica, but there isn't a series of them like there are in Eurasia, which is pretty huge. I'm going to continue this in just a second, and we'll move on through First Farmers in a part 2. And we get to part 2, we'll look at what a civilization is. And it's real important that you focus on this, because that's where we're heading here. Chapter 3